Chapter 1. The Cage Above the Courtyard. The first thing I saw that morning was not a corpse, nor even a frightened face, but 2 green parrots asleep beneath a red cloth in a brass cage that hung from the second gallery of Zincirli Han. The cage turned very slightly in the damp air, though there was no wind in the courtyard. Rain had fallen before dawn and left the stones black as old ink. Along the upper ledges women had spread pomegranate skins to dry, and the wet weather had deepened their colour so that they looked like pieces of darkened lacquer. My companion, Mr. Peregrine Vale, paused just inside the archway and looked upward, not at the parrots themselves, but at the chain from which the cage was hung. He drew from his pocket the narrow strip of linen tape he always carried, ran it once between finger and thumb, and let it dangle again. This was a habit of his. I've seen him do it in drawing rooms, at ferry landings, in church porches, and once in the middle of a graveyard while a widow was weeping within 10 yards of him. The movement had in it something of measurement and something of restraint, as though he kept his own mind upon a tether. "You have brought me to a place where every surface remembers a hand," he said. "That is encouraging." I ought to explain that I was then newly returned to Constantinople after some years in Smyrna, and was serving in a modest medical practice near Pera. Mr. Vale had reached the city 3 weeks before me, with letters of introduction to bankers, consuls, and one eccentric bishop. How he supported himself I never knew with certainty. He had money when it was required, and none of the habits of a man anxious to display it. He liked facts better than comfort, and once remarked to me that he found society useful in the same way another man might find a lamp useful, which was not to admire the lamp but to see it. We had been summoned to Zincirli Han by a merchant named Nihat Basmachi, whose nephew had fallen into one of my fever wards the previous month. He met us at the entrance with his face the colour of old parchment and his hands opening and shutting at his sides. "Doctor, Effendi, you must come quickly. I have locked the stairs myself. Nobody has entered since we found him. God sees me. I touched nothing but the key." He led us through the lower court, past stalls where copper basins hung in neat descending circles, and shelves of indigo thread glimmered like river water in shade. Men spoke in low bursts and then stopped when we passed. A boy carrying a tray of tea glasses stood quite still against the wall until his tray rattled from his own trembling. The dead man's room was in the upper gallery facing inward over the court. Its door was painted a weary green, and its brass plate, polished more often than the wood about it, read simply S. Erton. Nihat produced the key. Before using it, Mr. Vale crouched with unexpected grace and examined the lock, the threshold, and the worn plank immediately beneath the latch. "What do you observe?" I asked. "That the dust here is not the ordinary dust of a merchant's passage," he said. "It carries a brighter grit. Brick or tile? Not much. Enough." He opened the door. Selim Erton sat at his desk as though he had lain down only in thought and would presently stir. His chin had sunk against his chest. One hand rested palm up near an account book. The other hung at his side and almost touched the floor. Only the unnatural stillness of the fingers betrayed at once that life had gone out of him. He had been strangled with something narrow. The mark was high and deep. There was surprisingly little disorder. A fallen chair stood near the wall. The window lattice had been pushed inward a finger's width. On the desk lay 3 seals, a silver paper knife, and an oil lamp whose chimney was filmed on one side with soot. I crossed to him and made the examination expected of me, though it was a needless kindness to routine. He had been dead perhaps an hour and a half. His skin still held some warmth at the throat. There were tiny broken threads clinging near the collar. "Silk," said Mr. Vale before I had spoken. "You saw them from there?" "I saw you seeing them." He turned slowly around the room, and our late Mr. Erton received a visitor whom he admitted willingly. The counting room was lined with shelves of wrapped ledgers and lacquered boxes. A smell of vellum, amber tobacco, and damp stone lingered beneath the sharper scent of lamp smoke. On a stand in the corner sat a rolled carpet wrapped in muslin, too fine, at a glance, for ordinary trade. The desk drawers had been opened, but not ransacked. A square patch of cleaner wood upon the desk suggested that some box or tray was usually kept there and had recently been removed. Nihat stood in the doorway, pressing his knuckles to his mouth. "He sent for coffee not 10 minutes before," the man whispered. "My clerk Yusuf took it up." The door was shut. There was no answer. He thought perhaps Mr. Erton had gone out by the gallery, but then he saw the light under the door and called again. We fetched me. We opened with the spare key. "Who has keys?" asked Vale. "Mr. Erton." "Me, because I own the Han. And his head clerk Basilio, when papers must be carried after hours." "Where is Basilio?" "At his rooms over the spice lane. I sent it to him. He's coming." Mr. Vale stepped to the window. It opened not onto the street but over the inner court, the drop sufficient to break a man's leg if not his neck. The lattice work outside was elaborate. One narrow panel at its lower edge had been recently repaired with a strip of paler wood. Vale touched it lightly, then withdrew his hand. "Doctor, look at the victim's cuffs." The left cuff was frayed and bore a faint yellow stain. I bent closer. "Saffron," I said after a moment, "or some similar dye, not from this room." "No," he inclined his head, "yet he died at his desk. By then others had gathered. Among them I first noticed Feridi Hanım, though at the time I marked her only because everyone else seemed to make way for her without knowing they did so. She was a widow of perhaps 50, straight-backed, plainly dressed in dove grey with a darker shawl, and she kept a small workshop in the lower arcade repairing ceremonial hangings, military sashes, and old prayer rugs for wealthy houses. Her face was one of those that do not beg to be called handsome yet are impossible to forget. A patient face. A face that had learned economy. "Poor man," she said softly when she heard the name of the dead. "He had enemies, but he had kindness too. Let us not pretend one cancels the other." She spoke with no tremor and offered, before anyone asked, to send hot water for my hands and coffee for the landlord, who looked near collapse. It struck me then that certain women steady a room by the mere act of remaining in it. I thought so of her at once. Mr. Vale did not look at her. He looked instead at the hem of her shawl, where two tiny lengths of blue silk clung like loose eyelashes. Then he glanced toward the soot-darkened lamp chimney and back to the desk. "Who knew," he asked Nihat, "that Mr. Urton claimed to possess something newly arrived and of consequence?" At this, the whispering along the gallery rose and changed its tone. It was scary. It became an appetite. Nihat hesitated. He said last night, before witnesses, that a register had come into his hands, an old court book. There are names in it, families, estates. He spoke too loudly. He enjoyed being envied. And this morning? This morning he told Basilio the register was missing, so he announced a theft before he became a murder victim, said Vale. Nihat nodded. The parrots above us began to shriek under their clothes. Everyone in the gallery started absurdly, as though the dead man himself had spoken. Feridi Hanım crossed herself in the Eastern manner and turned toward the stair. Mr. Vale watched the movement of her hands, not the gesture's piety, but its neatness, and then at last he addressed the room. "No one is to remove a ledger, a rug, a tray, or a scrap of silk from this building. No one is to wash a cup, empty an ash dish, or alter a lamp. If any of you have done so already, that omission will become heavier later than it seems now." There was a brief rustle of protest. Merchants are quick to cry inconvenience even within sight of death. Vale ignored it. As for me, I remained looking at Selim Urton and thinking that the expression on a dead face is often only the reader's vanity imposed upon blankness. Yet there was something in his mouth, drawn slightly sideways, that suggested not terror but offended surprise. He had admitted someone. He had understood too late, and even in death he seemed less betrayed by violence than by presumption. When we descended, Ferida Hanım was waiting in the lower court with a tray she had taken from the tea-boy's unsteady hands. She offered me a glass first, then Vale. "You must excuse the courtyard," she said. "By noon every man in the bazaar will know a different version. By evening each version will have its witness." Mr. Vale accepted the tea and held it up to the light without drinking. "That is why facts are so costly," he said. "They travel badly." Her eyes, dark and level, rested on him for an instant. "And yet," she replied, "they arrive in the end." I remember that exchange because at the time it seemed no more than a graceful civility. But Vale, after she'd gone back to her stall, set down his untouched glass and said in a tone almost too low to hear, "She's either exceptionally composed or already exhausted." From what? From carrying something that has not yet been asked of her. I looked across the court. Ferida Hanım had resumed her work, head bent over a folded length of old gold embroidery, while the voices around her swelled and broke like waves against stone. Above her the brass cage turned very slowly under its red cloth. By evening we had the names of the dead man's enemies, his rivals, his creditors, his favoured clients, and the woman he had married too late for anyone's comfort. We had, in short, the whole easy machinery of suspicion. What we did not have was the missing register. And before that day was done, Mr. Vale told me that the thing most worth finding in Zincirli Han was not the book at all, but the person who had lied first about it. Chapter 2. What the Widow Wore. If one wishes to understand a dead man, one does better to visit the living arrangements he imposed than the chamber in which he died. This was one of Mr. Vale's maxims, and I have since found it nearly always true. The next afternoon, therefore, we went not first to the police office, where statements were multiplying like flies on fruit, but to the house Selim Urton had kept with his wife in a narrow street behind the Nur Osmaniye Mosque. It was a respectable house without warmth. The brass knockers shone, the curtains were expensive and chosen without affection. Even the potted myrtle by the steps had the disciplined look of something tended by servants under instruction. The widow received us in a long room with painted ceilings and windows that gave onto a strip of courtyard planted with basil. She was young enough that the title still sat strangely upon her. Madame Clara Urton had been, before her marriage, Clara Valente of Galata, the daughter of a Levantine shipping agent. She might have been 30, though distress had thinned the soft confidence from her face. She wore black satin trimmed too richly for recent grief, or perhaps grief and vanity had merely collided and neither quite yielded. There are women who dress for sorrow as others dress for supper. I do not condemn them. Clothing is sometimes the last region where self-command survives. "You are Dr. Fenwick," she said, offering a hand still faintly scented with violet water. "And this is Mr. Vale. I have been told you are not with the police, which recommends you to me already." Vale bowed slightly. "The police have their uses, madam. I am merely another kind of inconvenience." At that she almost smiled, then seemed to remember herself. There were two other people in the room. One was a thin young man of grave manner named Kemal Arslan, introduced as a family friend who had been assisting with correspondence since the death. The other was Basilio Drossos, Ayrton's head clerk, a Greek of perhaps 40, with a polished beard and eyes that missed nothing they could turn into advantage. Basilio rose when we entered and resumed his chair only after Clara had done so. The movement was respectful, though just overly rehearsed. One felt he had practiced loyalty in mirrors. "I will tell you at once," Clara began, "what everyone is hinting at, and none are decent enough to say. My husband had many secrets. I did not know half of them. If he is dead because of some old bargain or filthy paper from the provinces, I shall not pretend astonishment." "And yet you married him," I said, more bluntly than good breeding required. She turned to me with a fatigue so naked it made the answer honest. "Yes, I married a man who was already older, already careful, already admired by people who owed him things. I believed caution was a form of safety. That was my error." Kemal shifted at this, as if the words stung him on her behalf. He was a handsome fellow in a sober way, perhaps 26, with a small scar at the chin, and the composure of one who had learned young never to appear uncertain. His cuffs were clean but mended. His loyalty to Clara seemed real, or at least ardent enough to imitate reality very well. Basilio cleared his throat. "If Madame has finished denouncing the dead, perhaps we may speak of facts." Vale's gaze moved toward him without haste. "By all means, begin with the register." Basilio spread his hands. "A court register from the old days. Provincial. Valuable because it named land transfers after the reforms. A dozen men would pay for it. Mr. Ayrton told me he had secured it through a contact from Bursa. He was exultant. Then this morning he says it is missing from the office. He accuses everyone by implication and no one by name. 2 hours later, he is dead. Did you see the register yourself? I saw the wrapping. Opened? No." Vale took out his linen tape and looped it slowly over his fingers. "Then you saw a wrapped object, which Mr. Ayrton said was a register." Basilio's mouth tightened. "You imply he lied." "I observe that men who deal in papers often begin with papers about papers." Clara rose abruptly and crossed to the window. Her black dress gave a dry whisper against the carpet. "He lied easily," she said. "Not always for profit. Sometimes for pleasure. He liked to watch people rearrange themselves around what he had said. That sentence, spoken without bitterness, and therefore with twice its force, seemed to affect Kemal more than the mention of the murder had done." He looked down. Basilio looked irritated. Vale noticed both, and I, because I had spent enough years among patients to understand the body's betrayals, noticed that Clara's hands were perfectly steady until Kemal's silence prolonged itself beyond comfort. Then one finger began tapping the window frame. "Tell me about the morning," said Vale. Basilio gave us the sequence as he had given it already to the police. He had arrived late because of a ferry delay. Ayrton was angry. He spoke of theft. He sent Basilio away to fetch an invoice from another dealer, though the task might easily have waited. Basilio had been gone for nearly 40 minutes. On returning to Zincirli Han, he found the courtyard in uproar, and his employer dead. "It is convenient," I said. "It is true," he answered sharply. "You may verify the invoice and the dealer." Vale asked, "Who besides yourself knew the victim kept keys to certain cabinets?" Many knew. Few had access. My master was suspicious of everyone, which is to say he trusted me only because he required a man who knew his habits. And his wife? At that Clara gave a little laugh, empty of mirth. "My husband trusted me with guests, dinners, and the appearance of harmony. He did not trust me with papers." "Yet he married you," said Vale. "Yes," she said, turning back. "He liked beautiful things that looked more innocent than they were. It was a cruel line. I felt it as such, yet it seemed aimed less at herself than at some long private memory of him." We were shown afterward to Ayrton's study. There, among cabinets and portfolios, Vale spent a full quarter-hour examining not the papers first, but the room's smaller vanities, a cracked shell box on the mantel, a dried carnation between pages of a French devotional manual, a drawer containing 3 pairs of ladies' gloves, none of them Clara's size. He said nothing. When he did at last open the escritoire, he found nothing but orderly correspondence, a locked inner compartment, and a single torn scrap caught under the back rail. The scrap bore part of a watermark and 3 inked words in Ottoman script. Kemal, called in to assist, translated them after a quick glance. "Born of lawful union." He coloured slightly as he said it, perhaps from embarrassment at the subject. Clara turned away. Basilio pretended to find dust fascinating. "A marriage record," I suggested. "Or a copy of one," said Vale. "Or part of one. or something meant to look like one. He pocketed the scrap with Clara's permission. Then, to my surprise, he asked to see the household linen cupboard. He had no intention of laundry, of course, but the request flustered the housemaid so completely that she blurted out, before anyone had accused her, that Madame's black mourning veil had been stained and sent yesterday to Farida Hanum in the bazaar for cleaning and repair. Clara frowned. My grey afternoon veil, not black. The maid twisted her apron. Yes, Hanum Effendi, the grey one. Forgive me. Mr. Vale's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. What stained it? Saffron sherbet, they said. At dinner with the Pashazadis. A clumsy servant, Clara answered before the maid could elaborate. It is of no consequence. On the contrary, said Vale mildly. Small domestic errors are often the only honest witnesses. He let the matter drop there, though I knew that tone in him. He had added something to his inward ledger. As we left the house, Kamal came out behind us into the street. Mr. Vale, he said, if there is any work of sorting, translation, or carrying messages, I should be glad to help. Clara should not bear this alone. She has suffered enough for one life. Vale regarded him with that detached politeness which could make a sincere man feel inspected. You are devoted to the widow. Kamal flushed. I owe her family all regard. Owe is a firm word. It is the correct word. Vale inclined his head. Then keep it. I may ask for it later. When we reached the lane, I said, You suspect the young man? I suspect everyone who speaks as if debt were nobler than affection. Debt can be counted. Affection has edges. And the widow? I suspect her clothes. I laughed despite myself. That is thin. No, it is fabric. Much more useful. He turned then toward the bazaar instead of the police office, and on the way he bought from a street seller a small cone of roasted chestnuts which he did not eat. He merely held them in the paper as though weighing the warmth. At Zincherli Han we found Farida Hanum at work under the arcade, stitching a tear in a prayer rug with such delicacy that the needle seemed scarcely to enter the cloth. Light from the courtyard struck the copper bowl beside her and threw a mild red glow across her hands. You repaired Madame Urton's veil yesterday? Asked Vale. She lifted her eyes. I cleaned a spill. It was yellow, sticky and unnecessary, like most accidents at rich tables. Saffron, with rose syrup. It would have stained permanently if left. Did anyone bring it? Kamal Bey did. He apologized for the hurry as if the veil were a wounded soldier. There was a hint of amusement in her voice when she spoke of him. Maternal, I thought then, though I could not have said why. And Mr. Urton? Vale asked. Was he your customer also? Occasionally. Men who sell old things always need old things made presentable. She returned to her stitching. Her hands were steady. Only once did the thread catch. As a physician, I said, I am struck by your composure. She gave me a look both kind and faintly ironic. Doctor, composure is not peace. It is employment. Mr. Vale said nothing for several seconds. Then he asked, Did Selim Urton ever ask you to alter a document rather than a textile? At that, for the first time, she stopped altogether. No, she said, but if he had, I should have refused. There was no flourish in the reply, yet something in the exactness of it chilled me more than a denial would have done. That evening, while I wrote up my notes, Vale spread upon my table the torn scrap from Urton's study, 3 account names from the bazaar, and a list of households for whom Farida Hanum had worked during the past year. Beside them he laid, with equal care, the maid's remark about the stained veil. You have little and make much of it, I said. One must. When the murderer relies on the world making little of what matters and much of what glitters. He tapped the scrap with one finger. The dead man announced a missing register. No one saw it. The widow's veil was stained with saffron. The victim had saffron on his cuff. Farida Hanum cleans the veil. Kamal carries it. And our dead man had in his possession at least one fragment concerning lawful birth. You think these are connected? I think, he said, that someone in this city has spent years keeping a sentence from being read. Then he folded the scrap away and added, almost to himself, and I do not yet know whether that sentence is true. Chapter 3. The clerk with the polished beard. The police, having the advantage of official urgency and the disadvantage of official imagination, fixed first upon Basilio Drossos. It was natural enough. He had the spare key, a useful absence at the necessary hour, and a temper which frayed whenever contradicted. By noon, on the 3rd day, every coffee-house within walking distance had settled on him as the murderer, and each narrator improved the matter by adding either gambling debts or a jealous mistress. The city prefers a crime that arrives already furnished. Mr. Vale did not agree, though he took pains never to defend a suspect too early, which he considered almost a form of coaching. Instead, he proposed that we visit Basilio in his rooms above the spice lane. A man is least truthful in his employer's office, he told me. There he performs. At home he neglects scenery. The spice lane was bright that day after the rain, and the smell under its awnings was enough to make a sober man feel intoxicated. Cumin, clove, anise, dried lemon peel, hot sugar, damp sackcloth, and somewhere beneath all that the persistent animal odour of mules. Basilio lodged in 2 narrow chambers above a dealer in pepper. The walls were clean, the furniture good of its kind, and the mirror over the washstand so polished that one understood at once the man's affection for surfaces. He received us reluctantly, but not, I thought, fearfully. A guilty man may show nerve, yet there was in Basilio's irritation the sharpness of vanity offended rather than conscience cornered. "I have told the police everything twice," he said. "If you mean to arrest me, spare me repetition and do it." "We mean to observe you," said Vale. "Arrest is a coarser profession." That made Basilio blink. He motioned us to sit. Upon the table lay a set of accounts, a silver-backed brush, and a miniature icon so darkened with candle smoke that the saint's face had nearly vanished. Vale noticed, as I did, that one cuff of Basilio's coat had been recently resewn. The stitch was firm but hurried. "You were loyal to Sir Merton?" asked Vale. "I was useful to him." "Loyal is what masters call usefulness when they do not wish to pay more for it." "Then why stay?" Basilio gave a bitter smile. "Because useful men learn too much to leave cheaply." There was honesty in that. More honesty, perhaps, than he intended. He admitted that Erten had dealings of dubious cleanliness, false provenances, papers copied to resemble older papers, genealogies improved for ambitious families. Nothing, he said, unusual in a city where bloodline could be turned into coin by any man who knew the price of shame. "Did you assist in such work?" "I kept ledgers. I was not the hand that was forged." "The hand," said Vale softly, "is often less guilty than the eye." Basilio looked sharply at him. "You believe a woman wrote something for him?" "I believe someone with patience, fine control, and access to old materials did work he preferred not to be seen doing." Basilio hesitated, then laughed once without humour. "Half the city's respectability rests on patient women with fine hands. If you intend to arrest them all, send for more cells." Vale rose and moved toward the shelf. He touched nothing. He merely looked. Among Basilio's books was one French volume on paper restoration. Beside it stood a small lacquer box containing sand for drying ink. Basilio followed his glance and became for the first time uneasy. "You studied restoration?" I asked. "I studied survival." He said then that 2 years before, Erten had asked him to locate persons capable of repairing damaged ceremonial pieces and old manuscript wrappings without attracting notice. Through that errand, he had first met Farida Hanum. "She never touched a written page in my presence," Basilio said quickly. "Do not twist that into more." "Why hurry to say it?" asked Vale. Basilio's hand went to his beard. "Because she is respectable, and because you people like to improve ugliness by involving a respectable woman." It was a fair rebuke. I disliked him less for uttering it. "What of Madame Erten?" Vale went on. "Did she know her husband trafficked in family records?" Basilio shrugged. "She knew enough to despise him, and not enough to protect herself." "And Kemal Arslan?" That name altered him. "Not much. Enough." "A good young man," he said too promptly. "Earnest, grateful, useful in the house, entirely blameless." "Blameless men rarely require endorsements of that size," said Vale. Basilio stood. "You have your answer." It was plain we should get no more there. Yet as we turned to leave, Vale stooped suddenly near the hearth and picked up from the crack by the fender a tiny loop of old gold thread twisted around a black fibre. Basilio stared. "That is from nothing." "Most things are," said Vale, slipping it into an envelope, "until they are from something." "Outside in the lane," I said, "you do not think Basilio killed him?" "No." "Why not?" "He is too offended." "That is hardly proof." "No, it is a character. He would sooner steal from the dead than grieve for them. But he does not carry the silence of the person we need." We walked for a while. Street boys ran past with bread rings over their arms. An old man beneath a striped awning was scraping scales from a fish with a knife so dull it seemed almost ceremonial. Vale bought a sheet of cheap paper from a stationer and asked for a little brick dust, which the puzzled man provided from the floor of his shop where repairs were underway. Only when we'd returned to my rooms did he show me his purpose. From the threshold of Erten's office he had earlier taken a pinch of bright grit, mixed with water and spread on the paper beside the stationer's dust. It matched almost exactly. "Brick," I said. "Not from the office. Not from the gallery either, where the paving is stone, but there is fresh repair on the lower lattice of the counting room window. Brick dust clung to the sill, was brought to the threshold, and from there to the corridor." "You think the killer used the window?" "I think the window was used to suggest impossibility." "That is not the same thing." The distinction frustrated me. He knew it did, and was shameless about it. Late that afternoon a development occurred which set the whole bazaar roaring afresh. The police searched Basilio's rooms and found hidden in the lining of his travelling case a key not belonging to his own chambers and a small wrapped bundle of papers. He was arrested before sunset. The papers proved, under inspection, to be copies of property extracts bearing seals that did not satisfy the authorities. Basilio swore they had been planted. The police smiled, which is their customary answer to claims that happen to be true too often for comfort. "Planted Arrested by whom? I asked when the news reached us. By the person who can best endure his imprisonment, said Vale. If Basilio is vain, he is also expendable. The true murderer needs time, not applause. He sent me that evening to see Clara, while he himself disappeared into the quarter around the old paper merchants. I found her in a smaller sitting room than before, without visitors, and in a state of weariness so complete that formalities had dropped away. They have taken Basilio, she said. I suppose everyone expects me to feel safer. I feel only emptier. She confessed then, with startling directness, that her husband had once threatened to ruin a marriage prospect connected with Kemal Arslan unless certain letters vanished. What letters these were she did not know. Kemal, when pressed, had said only that they concerned his mother and were old enough to do no good. Clara had thought the matter ended months before. His mother? I said. Who is his mother? Farida Hanum, she answered. Did you not know? She never speaks of him as a son because he is proud and she is careful. But yes, Kemal is hers. I felt then that sharp inward click which comes when scattered things begin, without yet arranging themselves, to acknowledge a common centre. Saffron on the cuff, a stained veil carried by Kemal to Faride, a torn scrap about lawful birth, a dead man who enjoyed leverage, a mother with fine hands and unusual composure. Yet if Clara saw anything in my face, she misunderstood it. Do not look so, she said quickly. Faride is goodness itself. She helped me through my marriage more than once, though she never said a cruel word against him. If Selim held some old threat over her, that would not make her capable of murder. People always say this. What they mean is not that the person could not kill, but that they themselves would rather remain mistaken. When I told Vale what I had learned upon my return, he nodded as if I had merely confirmed an appointment. Yes, he said, I expected as much. You knew? I suspected a maternal connection the first day. She watches the young man as a house watches the room where a child once slept, and you said nothing. You had not yet earned the fact. This was one of his worst habits, and one that tried my patience past reason. Yet he was already bent over a packet of notes from the paper merchants, and I saw by the particular stillness that had come over him that another thought held him more tightly than my resentment. What is it? He looked up. Selim Erten commissioned, some months ago, a repair to the silk wrapper of an old provincial register. Not the register itself, the wrapper. He wished the cloth strengthened and a narrow braid resused so the packet would look untouched. By Faride? By Farid, and she must therefore have seen the register. Not necessarily, but she had the packet in her hands. He folded away the notes. My dear Fenwick, we now possess motive enough to spoil an innocent woman, and evidence enough to satisfy only a fool. It is an awkward combination. That night I slept badly. The city was close and warm. Somewhere in the alley a child coughed for an hour without comfort. I found myself thinking of Farida Hanum's hands as they moved through old cloth, preserving appearances, closing wounds in silk, making rent things seem continuous. The thought was not yet accusation. It was worse. It was sympathy taking shape before I had a right to it. At dawn a messenger arrived from the prison. Basilio Drossos had attempted to hang himself with a strip torn from his mattress ticking. He had failed. Before they cut him down, however, he cried out that if they wished the truth, they should ask why Selim Erten feared not the register, but the woman who could read what lay sewn into its edge. Chapter 4. A sentence. Hidden in silk. Basilio's outcry altered the case not because it named the murderer, but because it changed the direction of desire around the missing register. Until then, everyone had wanted the book as property. Suddenly it became something more dangerous, which is to say something that might speak. Men will risk prison for gold. They will risk damnation for a line of writing. Mr. Vale secured from the authorities a short interview with Basilio on the strength of no authority I could see, unless the man had simply worn down resistance by sounding more certain than those officially entitled to certainty. We found the clerk grey-faced and angry in equal parts. The red mark at his neck was ugly, though not severe. He seemed ashamed less of the attempt upon his life than of its failure. I did not try to die, he said at once. I tried to make them stop smiling. That is a poor method, said Vale. Now tell me about silk. Basilio licked his dry lips. Months ago, Erten received a packet from the interior. He is nervous, not pleased, nervous. The register inside had suffered dampness. The outer wrapper was split at one corner where the seam had rotted. He sent it through me to Farida Hanum. He said only that the wrapper must be repaired exactly as before, and when it returned, he locked it away. Then later he boasted of it to others as if it were treasure newly won. Did you see what troubled him? Basilio hesitated. Only once. He had opened the packet. I entered without knocking. He covered the page at once, but not before I saw there was writing also on a strip tucked into the seam of the wrapper. Tiny writing. A note perhaps. perhaps, hidden there. A note in whose hand? How should I know? It was small, old, brown with age. Did he mention it? He asked whether I believed a man could be made by a line, and unmade by the same line when read aloud. I told him that it depended on who was listening. Vale's expression did not change, though I knew the answer pleased him. Why did you not tell this earlier? Basilio gave a harsh laugh. Because no one asked the right question. Because I thought the register would be found and prove I had stolen nothing. Because once a man is called a clerk, he's supposed to know only accounts. Did Ertan ever threaten Farida Hanım directly? I never heard it, but I heard him threaten Kemal Arslan, not in words any outsider would seize. He told the young man one evening in the office that names are ladders until someone kicks away the wall. Kemal turned white. I remember because I thought he was a fool in love with the widow. Now I think there was more. On our way out, Basilio gripped the bars and said with sudden force, "She is a decent woman. Do you understand me? Better than the dead. Better than all of us. If she has done something, then Selim Ertan put a knife to years, not to flesh." I said nothing. Vale only replied, "Decency is not the opposite of violence. It is often what survives around it." From the prison, we went directly to Farida Hanım's workshop. I had expected evasion or alarm. Instead, we found her closing the shutters against a coming shower, while Kemal stood beside her, holding a folded length of faded blue silk. He turned, saw us, and his face changed too quickly to be missed. "Has there been news?" he asked. Vale answered him, but kept his attention upon Farid. "There has been honesty." She considered that, then motioned us inside. The workshop was small, lit from the arcade by an upper opening and by one hanging lamp whose wick had been trimmed close and clean. Rolls of braid, tassel and silk thread lined the shelves. On the central table lay a military sash half unpicked, and beside it a square wooden frame over which old velvet had been stretched for repair. The air smelled of beeswax, tea and warm cloth. "You may speak before my son," she said. There it was, at last, plain and undisguised. Kemal made a slight movement of protest, but she checked him with a glance. Vale drew from his pocket not a paper, as I had expected, but the tiny loop of gold thread and black fibre found in Basilio's room. This was under his grate. It matches the old gold couching used in ceremonial wrappers and certain Koran covers. It may mean nothing. The brick dust at the office threshold means more. So does the broken silk thread at Mr. Ertan's collar. So does the fact that you repaired a register wrapper for him, and that a hidden strip may have been sewn into its seam. Kemal took a step forward. "If you accuse my mother, I accuse no one yet," said Vale. "I ask whether, while repairing the wrapper, she discovered what Mr. Ertan later used for power." Farida Hanım sat down slowly. It was not the movement of guilt, but of a person setting weight upon something already carried too long. "I discovered," she said, "that old clothes remember more than old men deserve." Kemal stared at her. "Mother." She looked at him then with such tenderness that I felt at once an intruder. "When I repaired the seam," she said, a narrow strip of paper slid partly free from the braid. I read only enough to know it concerned a birth and a marriage. I did not understand all of it there. The hand was cramped. I put it back. I should have burned the entire thing. I did not. "Why not?" I asked gently. "Because until one reads the whole trap, one does not know whether it holds one's foot or another person's," Vale said. "And later?" "Later Selim Ertan sent for me privately. He asked whether I had noticed anything while repairing the wrapper. I said no. He smiled. It was a smile I knew from years before, though I had prayed never to see it again." Kemal had gone absolutely still. His hand closed on the folded silk he held until the knuckles whitened. "What years before?" he said. She didn't answer him. Not yet. Instead she turned to Vale. He knew then that I knew something, perhaps not everything. Enough. He began to speak of men who rise in the world on good names, men who should be grateful if no one questions the ladder beneath them. He asked after Kemal's work. He asked whether the young woman Clara had once introduced to him was still attentive. He did not threaten. He arranged the air so that the threat sat in it. Kemal said hoarsely, "Why did you tell me nothing?" "Because you had a life that was your own. Because I would not have it bent backward toward mine." I found myself looking not at her face but at the table, at a row of tiny embroidery scissors set neatly in order from smallest to largest. One pair was missing. Vale noticed it too. "Your short one tool." Her eyes moved once to the empty place, then back. "A customer has it. I borrowed it." "Which customer?" She shook her head. "That would be foolishly neat, Mr. Vale, and I am too tired to invent." He accepted that. Then he asked the question I dreaded. What was in the hidden paper? She did not speak for several seconds. Rain began outside, pattering first on the courtyard stones, then more heavily. Kemal lowered his head. "It was a note," she said at last, "written by the registrar who copied the original entry. It said the child recorded as born of lawful union had in fact been entered so by private insistence, to spare scandal to a family whose son had forced himself on a working girl and then died before marriage could be compelled." Kemal made a sound then. Not a cry, something smaller and worse. Faraday went on, because stopping would have broken her. That child was mine. No one moved. The rain sharpened. I could hear absurdly the tin click of water dripping from an awning chain outside. Kamal, she said, listen to me. The man named in the public record as your father was a decent cousin of my mother's who agreed, out of mercy, to marry me before your birth and give you his name. He died when you were 3. That name is the one under which you have lived honestly. It was honestly given in love, though the paper beneath it was altered. Kamal looked up at last. The devastation in his face was not shameful. It was the pain of seeing his mother's hidden life all at once and too late. Selim Ertan knew? He asked. Yes. How? Her mouth tightened. Because the man who harmed me was his elder brother, and because Selim helped arrange the false entry. The room seemed to alter shape around us. The dead man, who until that moment had been merely corrupt, became in one instant intimate with the tragedy at the case's core. He had not discovered an old weapon, he had forged it. Vale's voice, when he spoke, was very quiet, and when he later obtained the register, he found the note still sewn within the wrapper. Yes, and he meant to use it. Yes. Kamal covered his face with both hands. I could not speak. I was physician enough to know that shock comes often not with movement but with its arrest. Farid herself showed less outward disturbance than her son, though there was a quality in her gaze like a lamp turned low because the oil is nearly gone. Did you kill him? Asked Vale. She met his eyes. No, I believed her. That is the simple truth. I believed her then. Vale did not say he believed or disbelieved. He only asked, did you try to recover the register? Yes. When? The morning he died. I went to the office early before the lanes filled. He had not yet arrived. I had once seen Basilio use the spare key and knew where Nihat kept it. I entered and searched the desk. I did not find the register. I heard someone in the gallery and left by the window to the repaired lattice, because I feared scandal more than fools. Brick dust, I murmured. She inclined her head. I tore my sleeve. I caught the sill. Kamal stared at her. Mother, I would have told you if I had succeeded, she said. Failure has a way of postponing confession. This admission explained the dust and perhaps her composure. It did not yet make her a murderer. Vale asked whether she had seen anyone else. She had not. Whether she had touched Ertan, she had not. Whether she had taken anything. Only, she said, a torn scrap from among the desk papers which mentioned lawful birth. She feared it, then lost courage and burned it. That matched the fragment found in the study, if part of one larger note had been torn. When we left, Kamal remained behind with her. Through the half-open shutter, I saw him sink to his knees beside her chair like a child, though he was a grown man, and lay his forehead against her hand. She did not weep. She stroked his hair once. It was the most private public grief I have ever seen. In the street, I said, you do not think she lies. I think she has lied before and is telling the truth now. Then who killed Ertan? Vale looked back toward the arcade where the rain had turned the stones almost black. The person, he said, who knew she had gone to retrieve the register, and who understood that suspicion would gladly finish the rest. Someone protecting her, or protecting themselves behind her. He drew out his linen tape and wound it slowly once around his wrist. There is another cruelty in this business, Fenwick. We have assumed the hidden sentence threatens Kamal, but the man who most feared that sentence may have been Selim Ertan himself. Chapter 5. The young man with the borrowed duty. It is one of the weaknesses of kind-hearted observers that we excuse beauty more readily than solemnity. I knew this of myself when next we met Kamal Arslan alone, yet the knowledge did not wholly protect me from it. He came to my surgery that evening under the pretext of asking after a patient of Nihat's nephew, and sat with such composed misery in the consulting chair that had he confessed to any folly short of murder I might have forgiven him before hearing particulars. He had not slept. That was plain. The fine steadiness he ordinarily carried had begun to fray at the edges. Still, he held himself erect, as young men do when collapse seems to them a form of betrayal. My mother told you everything? He asked. Enough to wound you, I said. He gave a hard little breath. Not enough. I suspect a son is always told either too much too soon or too little too late. I offered him tea. He accepted and did not drink it. He spoke then not of himself first, but of Farid. She had worked from girlhood in houses richer than her own, learned careful manners because carelessness drew notice, and married a gentleman whose name Kamal still bore with gratitude. That man, Hassan Arslan, had known the situation before marriage and treated both mother and child with unshowy fidelity. He died of lung fever. Feride thereafter worked with needle and braid until her eyes failed at dusk. Kamal had studied under the patronage of a former client and lately secured a junior place in the office of a provincial administrator. Advancement depended in such systems not only on merit but on the absence of any stain that might embarrass sponsors. So Selim Ertan held power over you, I said. He held the possibility of contempt over my mother, Kamal answered. That was enough. He admitted at once that Ertan had hinted broadly in recent weeks, not merely of the register, but of old debts between families, old kindnesses requiring present gratitude. Kamal had endured as long as he could, and then confronted him in the office 3 days before the murder. What passed? He said I was a young man built on charitable revisions. He asked whether I meant to marry before before or after I learned my true history. I struck the desk, not him. I left. Basilio may have heard the end of it. Did Clara know? A shadow crossed him. She knew there was some difficulty, nothing more. I had suspected an attachment between him and the widow. Now I saw it plainly enough, though perhaps not even yet admitted between them in words. Misfortune breeds intimacies that decency cannot always name. You care for her, I said. He stared at the untouched tea. She deserved a life that was not arranged by other people's appetites. That is all I will say, which, being what it was, said enough. When Mr. Vale arrived from his own inquiries, he wasted no tenderness on preliminaries. You carried Madame Urton's veil to your mother, he said. Why you? Kemal looked mildly astonished. Because Clara was upset and I was available. You also ran errands regarding private papers for Selim Urton? Yes. And on the morning of the murder, I was at the house until nearly 10. Clara can confirm it. Can she confirm every minute? No, nor can I. Servants came and went. Vale nodded, as if the answer satisfied something. Then he did what I have most often seen him do when he wants the truth quickly. He asked a question slightly to one side of the matter. What did Selim Urton smell of? Kemal blinked. What? Humour me. Amber tobacco. Sometimes civet. Why? Because men remember odour when they have spent years enduring a person. Kemal's mouth tightened. And there was also an altar of roses on his cuffs when he came from certain houses. He liked to collect traces of women as if they were compliments. Vale's gaze sharpened. Certain houses? The Pashazadis. Sometimes Clara's sleeve. Once or twice, he added with obvious reluctance, my mother's workshop, because he would stand too near while discussing repairs. After Kemal left, Vale said, he is hiding something, though not what the police would prefer. You suspect him of the murder? I suspect him of thinking he ought to have committed it. That same afternoon, we were called to Clara's house by an event which at first seemed incidental, and later proved central. A maid, while sorting the dead man's linen for disposal, discovered in the cuff of one shirt a tiny brass key stitched beneath the facing. The key opened not any cabinet in the house, but a narrow document case hidden under the false bottom of an escritoire drawer in Selim Urton's study. Inside were 2 items only. The first was a draft letter in Urton's hand addressed to an unnamed official, proposing discreet verification of a man's birth record prior to appointment. The second was a folded paper containing a sketch of Zincherli Hand's upper gallery and office, with a mark at the repaired lattice. He expected someone to come by the window, I said, or wished later to claim he had, said Vale. Clara, who had stood silent through the discovery, sat down abruptly. He was baiting someone. Yes, said Vale. Likely more than one person. She pressed her hand to her mouth. He told me the night before that by week's end he would know which of his friends loved him honestly. I thought it was one of his odious jokes. Did he mention Faride? No. He mentioned only that certain respectable people become reckless when documents threaten them. Kemal, who had also come at our request, listened from the far side of the room with his face emptied of expression. Only once did he speak. If he laid a trap, perhaps he deserved to spring it himself. There are times when a sentence reveals more than its speaker intends. Clara turned sharply toward him. Vale, by contrast, seemed almost to have expected the words. Deserving, he said, is not a legal category, Mr. Arslan. Still less is it a practical one. That evening he had me accompany him back to Zincherli Han after most stalls were closed. The courtyard after hours possessed a different character. During the day it was commerce contained by stone. At night it became almost monastic. Lamps burned before a few upper windows. The parrots in their cage muttered under the red cloth. From a nearby lane came the distant rhythmic knock of a baker shaping dough for dawn. Vale borrowed a ladder from the watchman and examined the repaired lattice from the outside gallery. He then entered the counting room with permission and studied the lamp, the desk, and the position of Urton's chair for nearly an hour. At last, I said, what have you got? The dead man expected an intruder at the window, he answered. He also met, after that expectation, a visitor at the door whom he trusted enough to admit and approach. The strangulation occurred near the desk, not at the window. The chair was kicked when he rose too late. The killer stood behind or beside him, looped something narrow from the front and drew upward. Someone small but controlled could do it if surprise were complete. A woman or a slight man, but yes. And the lamp? He had moved it. How can you tell? The soot marks one side only. The chimney had been lifted and replaced badly. The oil on the desk is fresh. Someone altered the light during or after the meeting. For what purpose? To read something, or to search quickly. He crossed them to the rolled carpet in the corner, still wrapped in muslin. With the watchman as witness, we opened it. It proved to be a prayer rug of uncommon age with a border once magnificently worked in gold and blue, now worn. One end had been recently rebacked. Vale traced the edge with his fingers, then stopped at a place where a braid had been carefully opened and reclosed. This is not the register wrapper, I said. No, but it is the work of the same hand. You know that? I know the tiny hesitation before each turn of the couching thread. Fried sews with admirable precision, but one finger is slightly stiff. It leaves a pattern. I confess I stared at him in exasperation. You mean to identify a murderer by personality in stitches? I mean to identify the passage of objects between people who trust one another enough not to keep receipts. The rug, he believed, had once contained in its edge a concealed strip much unlike the one in the register wrapper. Selim Erten had perhaps used such methods more than once to move or hide papers without alarming clients. If so, more than one person might know the trick. On our walk back, he finally gave me what he had withheld. I asked among the paper restorers this morning. One old Armenian binder recalled seeing Kamal Arslan some weeks ago purchasing gum, fine linen paste and Japanese tissue used for mending torn paper. Kamal? Yes. For what purpose? He said it was for a clerical task in the house. The binder remembered because the young man overpaid and refused change. That disturbed me more than I liked. You think Kamal found and tampered with the hidden note? I think, said Vale, that he may have tried to save his mother by means less violent than murder, but any alteration to the hidden paper creates a second field of motives. We were nearly in my room when he stopped beneath a lantern and turned. Fennec, there are now 3 possibilities. Feride killed Erten to stop exposure. Kamal killed him to protect Feride. Or a third person killed him because either mother or son had already disturbed the document and made them vulnerable to blame. Who is the third? He looked down the wet street where the light failed before the next corner. The one person in this affair, he said, who has shown devotion that is useful, grief that is eloquent, and no surprise at all in the presence of moral rot. Clara? No, she still suffers honestly. I mean the person whose duty has been borrowed so often that it now fits like a tailored coat. Kemal? He shook his head. Basilio, I said. Again he shook his head. Then I understood. You cannot mean Feride. I mean, he said, that the most dangerous person in a case is often the one everyone has agreed to call good. Chapter 6. The House of Revised Names. The trail of names led us away from the bazaar for a day and into a quarter of old wooden houses near Üsküdar, where records sleep badly and gossip wakes early. Mr. Vale had obtained, by methods I did not scrutinize, the address of the retired registrar whose note had apparently been sewn into the wrapper years before. The man, one Haji Ismail Effendi, was now almost blind and lived with a married daughter in a house that smelt of quince preserve and old paper. He received us with the querulous suspicion of the elderly who have spent a lifetime handling other people's legitimacy and expect little gratitude for it. If this is about taxes, I am dead already, he declared before we sat. It is about a birth entry altered 26 years ago, said Vale. The old man's pupils clouded, yet at the date something flickered in him. Altered by whom? By private insistence to spare scandal. He said nothing. His daughter muttered a prayer in the doorway and withdrew. At length he admitted what age and conscience had perhaps worn into softness. A wealthy family had pressed for the regularizing of a birth after one son of that house seduced or forced a poorer girl. There had been talk of marriage to save her. The son died suddenly in a riding accident before arrangements could be completed. The dead young man's brother, already shrewd in trade, intervened. A decent relative of the girl agreed to marry her quickly and accept the child in name. The registrar copied the entry accordingly, then wrote, for his own protection or perhaps as a feeble memorial to truth, a note, and hid it where it might later be found if dispute arose. Which family? I asked. He turned his blind gaze toward the window. I was paid to forget, he said. Vale laid before him not money but the torn scrap from Erten's study. The old man touched it and gave the faintest nod. Yes, that is my hand, or what remains of it. And the family? He spoke then. It was indeed the Erten family. The dead young man was Murad Erten, elder brother to Selim. The girl was Feride, then employed in the house of an aunt. The compassionate husband was Hassan Arslan, now long dead. All this matched what Farid had told us, save for one detail of consequence. The child's original baptismal and municipal papers under Hassan Arslan's name were completed properly after marriage, said the old registrar. The hidden note did not undo that. It merely recorded how the first entry had been compelled. In other words, said Vale, Kamal's public name rests on a lawful later act, even if the earlier entry was corrupt. Yes, that was important. It meant Selim Erten's leverage over Kamal was partly bluff. Exposure could disgrace, wound, and perhaps injure prospects. It need not legally erase the young man's name. Did Selim know this? I asked. The old man's face twisted. If he read carefully, yes, but cruel men prefer the version of truth that frightens most. On the ferry back across the Bosphorus, Vale stood at the rail while gulls wheeled and dipped behind us. He said only, that makes the blackmail more contemptible and the murder less necessary. Then you move away from Feride. I move away from desperation, but not yet from concealment. We found a new agitation awaiting us at Zincirli Han. During the night, someone had broken into Feride Hanım's workshop. Nothing obvious was stolen. Drawers had been opened, spools upset, a chest of old braids forced. One shelf alone seemed carefully searched. Feride herself looked neither frightened nor surprised. That last fact did more to unsettle me than alarm would have done. Whoever came, she said, wanted paper, not silk. Kamal stood beside her with murder in his eyes for the unknown intruder. Clara had also come from the house upon hearing of it, and was helping restore order with quiet competence. I noticed, not for the first time, how naturally she and Kamal moved around one another, each avoiding touch with the awkward precision of the already attached. Mr. Vale examined the workshop. On the floor near the broken chest he found a smear of black wax. On the inside shelf he found a torn morsel of thin tissue paper, such as conservators use in mending. "Kamal," he said without looking up, "have you been here recently on paper business rather than filial business?" Kamal coloured. "I came once to ask my mother whether a wrapper seam could be opened without visible damage." Faride turned to him in astonishment. "Why?" he answered after a pause. "Because I meant to remove the hidden note before Salim used it. I thought if I could get the register first I might spare you." "You found it?" "No," Vale rose. "You bought paper mending supplies." Kamal looked from him to me and back. "Yes, you altered something else then." He shut his eyes for a moment. "A copy. Selim kept a transcript draft in his house. I found it among his loose papers one evening and removed the lines naming lawful birth. I thought if he used the copy, it would frighten no one. Did he discover the alteration?" "He must have. He told me the next day that boys who meddle with archives should learn the difference between an original and a rehearsal." Clara drew in her breath. "Kamal, why did you not tell me?" He looked at her with a mixture of shame and fatigue, because each hour I delayed made the truth uglier to say. Here then was our second false path made plain. Kamal had indeed meddled with papers, bought supplies, and concealed acts from all around him. Yet these were the cowardices of protection, not necessarily of murder. Vale asked, "Where were you at the moment Salim died?" "In the courtyard of your respectable widow's house," he answered bitterly, "arguing with a maid over letters Clara wished to post." This alibi, once checked, held sufficiently well to exclude him from the narrow window of death. So the field contracted again. That evening, at my room, Vale arranged on the table all we knew. Faraday had repaired the wrapper and later entered the office by the window to recover the register. Kamal had altered a copy elsewhere, trying to blunt Salim's weapon. Basilio had known of the hidden note and had been framed with planted papers. Clara had motive enough in misery, though less in direct peril. Selim had baited the window and concealed a key in his cuff. The killer admitted by the door had strangled him with narrow silk and searched by a lamplight afterward. "What remains?" I asked. "The morning's sequence," said Vale. "Always the sequence. We still possess acts without their order." He then did a thing I'd seen him do only when near certainty. He took out the linen tape and measured, not objects, but spaces across my floor, muttering times under his breath. Suppose Faride enters early by window, fails, leaves dust. Selim arrives and notes the disturbance. He waits. Basilio comes. Selim sent him out. Why? Because he expects the true visitor soon and wants privacy. The visitor enters by door. There is conversation. A document is produced or demanded. The lamp is adjusted. Selim is strangled. The killer searches, leaves. Moments later, coffee is brought. But who? He gave me no answer. Instead, he asked whether I recalled what Clara had worn at our first visit after the murder. Black satin. And jewellery. A small jet brooch, I think. And at the house before marriage. I frowned. "I never knew her then." "I did," he said. "At a musical evening in Pera. She wore no scent and no ornament she did not choose for mockery. Now she wears violet water because Selim liked it, and black because society requires it. She is not the person he married. Grief alone did not do that." I could not follow the relevance. He saw it and almost smiled. "The dead man made collections, Fenwick. Papers, favours, women, traces. He liked possession more than use. Such men believe everyone can be arranged into utility. When one of them is killed, the answer lies not in who hated him most, but in who had lately ceased to be useful. The thought haunted me without yet enlightening me. It was near midnight when he at last sent me to bed. Before I slept, I heard him moving in the next room where he had spread his notes, then stillness, then the faint dry whisper of his tape being wound and unwound in the dark. In the morning he woke me with a sentence. "The murderer," he said, "borrowed Farid's guilt before Farid knew she had left it behind." Chapter 7. The Woman at the Window. When one has a theory in a murder case, it is tempting to seize the nearest person and brandish it. Mr. Vale despised such theatre. "A conclusion," he once told me, "is like fine glass. Carry it too openly through a crowd and some fool will break it with enthusiasm." He therefore chose indirection. He sent first for Clara Urton. She came to my room in the afternoon wearing a severe dark dress and a hat with no ornament beyond a folded band of crepe. She looked older than when we first saw her, though perhaps only more stripped of performance. Vale received her with formal courtesy and asked after her health, the servants, the condolences from relations, and the endless legal inconveniences which death causes the bereaved before pity is properly exhausted. At last he said, "Madam, I have learned something which may ease one fear. The hidden note concerning Kamal Arslan's birth, though scandalous in origin, does not legally destroy the name under which he lives." Her eyes lifted quickly, too quickly for surprise to be feigned. "You know then," she said. "Yes." She sat very still. "Feridi told me only yesterday." "I think," said Vale, "that you knew earlier." A lesser man might have phrased it as an accusation. In his mouth it sounded merely like a measurement brought to term. She looked away toward the window. "I knew," she said at length, "that Selim held something over them. Not the whole history. Enough. How enough? He made me carry a message once. Not in words. He asked me, in Kamal's hearing, whether I believed a name given in pity could endure public curiosity. I saw Kamal's face. Afterward I asked. He denied. Later he admitted there was an old cruelty in his mother's youth, and that Selim had papers. I did not press. Cowardice often dresses itself as discretion. Vale said, "You loved him." Clara's mouth moved, though whether toward assent or refusal I could not tell. I do not know what right the word has after one marries another man, but yes, if it helps your inquiry, yes. It was perhaps the first entirely plain sentence I had heard from her, and Selim knew. I think he suspected. Men like him smell attachment because they cannot imagine not exploiting it. Vale let a little silence settle. Then he asked, "On the morning of the murder, did you go to Zinchili Han?" She turned back sharply. No, it was not a bad lie. It came cleanly. Only her left hand, resting on the arm of the chair, tightened once. "You sent Kamal with your veil to Faridi the day before?" "Yes." "And before that, had you yourself been to Faridi's workshop?" "Several times. She repaired household things for me." "Did she ever speak to you about the hidden note?" "No." "Did you ever see Selim's sketch of the office window?" Her colour altered. "Not much." "Enough." "No." Vale nodded as if satisfied. Then, to my astonishment, he thanked her and let her go. When she had left, I burst out, "You know it is she." He resumed winding his tape. "I know that she has entered the region where a liar prefers brevity. That is useful, not final. But the motive, too generous. Her love for Kamal explains interference. It does not yet explain the method. It did not, however, prevent the method. We learned before evening from a servant in Clara's house that she'd gone out alone early on the morning of the murder, ostensibly to visit a dressmaker. The dressmaker confirmed no such visit. More striking still, the servant remembered that Clara had returned with one glove damp and a smear of yellow at the cuff, which she angrily washed herself. "Saffron," I said. "Likely? And she knew of the window because Selim had shown her the sketch or spoken of it." "Yes." "Then why not arrest her?" "Because she did not enter through the window." He laid out the sequence as he now saw it. Feride, driven by fear for her son, entered early by the repaired lattice and searched unsuccessfully. She left traces of brick dust and perhaps loosened some papers. Selim arrived and discovered the disturbance. Delighted rather than alarmed, he prepared to turn it to account. He sent Basilio away to ensure privacy. Clara, meanwhile, having learned enough from Kamal to understand that Selim meant to destroy him, or Faridi by means of some hidden record, went to confront her husband. Selim admitted her. He showed her something, perhaps not the original, but enough. He enjoyed her distress. She seized the nearest narrow cord or braid from materials already in the office and strangled him during that moment of cruel superiority, which such men mistake for safety. And afterward, she searched frantically for the document, failed, altered the lamp to read better, and left. Later, she let suspicion drift toward the window intruder she dimly guessed had already come. This explained much. It even explained the soot-darkened lamp, the admitted by-door meeting, the slight physical force required, the saffron traces from contact with her stained veil or sleeve, and the later burglary of Ferid's workshop if Clara believed some paper had been hidden there. Yet something still held Vale back. "What is missing?" I asked. "The register." "Clara has it." "No." "How can you tell?" "Because if she had it, Ferid's workshop would not have been searched later." "Then who took it?" He gave me that glance of his which always meant I had reached the cliff edge but not yet looked down. "The person who benefited most from Clara's act without committing it." I stared. "Kamal? At last?" The idea revolted me. Not morally, for by then all our moral ground was ruined, but emotionally. I had pitied him too much. "You believe he drove Clara to it?" "I believe he told her enough to inflame fear and withheld enough to direct it. He knew of the sketch. He knew his mother had gone once by the window. He knew Selim would humiliate Clara if confronted. Perhaps he meant only recovery of the paper. Perhaps more. But after the murder, someone removed the original register from the office before the police sealed every object. Who could do so? A trusted helper in the widow's house with access to Selim's study and effects. This was monstrous. It was also plausible. But Kamal has an alibi. For the strangling, yes. Not for the disappearance of the register. Nor for the burglary at his mother's workshop if he believed Clara had hidden the note there or if he wished to seem protective. I felt sickened by the thought. Yet as often happens in such cases, once named, it multiplied its own evidence backward. Kamal's purchase of repair materials, his careful understatements, his borrowed duty, his habit of speaking of debt rather than affection, the way Basilio's arrest had benefited him by removing a witness to earlier confrontations, the way he had fallen at his mother's hand not only in grief perhaps, but in relief. Then he is the true villain. Vale shook his head. No, the true villain died at his desk. That is why this case is sadder than most. Before I could answer, a messenger arrived from Zinchili Han with urgent news. The parrot's cage above the courtyard had broken loose in the night and fallen, red cloth and all, onto the stones below. One bird was dead. The other, half mad with fright, had flown through the arcade and been caught in the rafters of Feridi's workshop. Among the spilled contents of the cage tray, the watchman had found a folded strip of old paper tucked beneath the seed pan. Vale was out the door before the messenger finished speaking. The strip, when unfolded in the courtyard under every eye that mattered, proved to be part of the hidden registrar's note. Not the whole. Enough to name the private insistence. Enough to mention the younger Urton brother. Enough to suggest that someone had hidden the paper where suspicion would be delayed by absurdity. "Who keeps the parrots?" asked Vale. Nihat answered helplessly. "They belong to no one and everyone. A present left years ago by a merchant who died. Farida feeds them often because the boys forget." Farida herself had gone pale at last. "I never hid anything in that cage," she said. "I know," said Vale. Kamal, standing near Clara, did not speak. Vale turned the strip in his fingers. "The cage hangs above the gallery facing Salim's office," he said. "Anyone crossing privately might use it for concealment. A childish place, unless one expects no one to look." Then he raised his eyes to Kamal. "Mr. Arslan," he said, "you are very fond of appearing dutiful. It is time you were useful instead." Chapter 8. Everything the Bazaar overheard. Kamal did not bolt. That in a way condemned him more than flight might have done. He stood in the courtyard under the swinging shadow of the broken cage and looked first at his mother, then at Clara, and only then at Mr. Vale. Each look was different. Toward Farida there was pain. Toward Clara, fear. Toward Vale, calculation. "If you accuse me," he said, "accuse me properly." "I shall," said Vale, "but first I prefer you to correct my errors." A small circle had formed by then. Nihat the landlord, 2 spice dealers, the tea boy. Faridi seated because I insisted on it, though she seemed scarcely aware of the stool beneath her. Clara is upright and white. Even Basilio had been brought under guard for a brief confrontation, his eyes glittering with bitter vindication. The courtyard listened. Bazaars are built for trade, but they hunger for reckoning. Vale spoke with no raised voice. "You learned from your mother, or guessed from Salim's taunts, that an original register existed with a hidden note concerning your birth. You found later that your public name was not legally void, but the scandal remained dangerous to your prospects and intolerable to your mother's dignity. You altered a copy among Salim's papers, hoping to blunt his threat. Then you understood there was also an original. You told Clara enough to alarm her. Perhaps you wished she would plead with Salim. Perhaps, in some unadmitted place in you, you wished worse. Meanwhile, your mother, without telling you, went early by the office window to search. She failed and left traces. Salim discovered them and prepared to exploit the event. Clara came to confront him and killed him. Afterward, while assisting in the house and among his papers, you found the original register. You removed the hidden note from its wrapper and concealed part of it in the parrot's cage, where you thought it safe until you decided what to destroy." Kamal listened without interruption. When Vale finished, he gave a slow exhalation. "That is almost clever enough to be true. Which part fails?" Kamal smiled then, and in that smile I saw for the first time not the grave young man of good habits, but the sharp intelligence beneath, long forced into obedience, and lately gone bad from pressure. "I did not need to tell Clara much," he said. "She already knew enough to hate him." Clara gave a soft sound as if struck. He turned to her, and what followed was worse than denial. "You wanted a reason to go to him," he said. "Do not make yourself smaller by pretending otherwise." She drew back. "I wanted him to stop." "Yes, and if he would not stop." He did not finish. He did not need to. Faraday rose then despite my attempt to steady her. "Kamal," she said, "answer plainly." He faced her, and the hardness went out of him so suddenly that it was like watching an actor forget his role. "I found the register after he died," he said. "That part is true. I had seen where he hid certain things in the study. I thought if the police found it first, you would be ruined. I took it. I cut out the note. I meant to burn it, but I could not. It was the only written witness that what was done to you had been known and not imagined, so I hid it, foolishly." "In the cage?" "Yes. Only for an hour, I thought. Then everything changed," Vale said. "And the burglary at your mother's workshop?" Kamal closed his eyes once. "Mine. I thought Clara, after killing him, might have placed something there, or my mother might have taken more than she admitted." "I found nothing," Clara whispered. "You let them suspect her." At that he flinched. "I let them suspect many people," he said. "I am ashamed of it." Vale's expression remained grave but not triumphant. "Did you intend Clara to kill him?" "No." The answer came at once. Then, after a pause that cost him, he added, "I intended her to understand enough that she would force a crisis. I told myself that once the paper was in the open, bluff would lose its power. I did not think she would be alone with him." That, I believe, was true. Yet truth does not always acquit. All eyes turned then to Clara. She had not fainted, as weaker fiction would have required. She simply stood in such still misery that I feared for her pulse more than for her composure. "I went," she said. "Yes, I went to his office. He had sent Basilio away." He laughed when he saw me. "He said at last I'd come without pretending to discuss dinners or accounts. He showed me part of the note and would not let me hold it. He said that by the week's end the governor's office would hear inquiries about Kamal's birth and that Farida would spend her old age watching doors close politely in her face. I begged him. Then I threatened him. He enjoyed both. Her voice faltered only once, then steadied. He said I had mistaken myself if I imagined I could save one person in this city without paying by another. Then he reached and took my wrist and said I was prettiest when terrified. No one moved. Even the tea boy's breath seemed audible. There was a silk cord on the desk, she said. Dark blue, around a parcel. I do not remember deciding. I remember only that he was smiling and then not smiling. Farida covered her mouth. Kamal bowed his head. Basilio from under guard muttered a curse at the dead. Afterward, Clara continued, I searched for the note. I found nothing. The lamp smoked. I wiped my hands. I went home. I thought at first I must confess. Then Kamal came later with such a face, and his mother stood there, and I saw at once what my confession would become. Not justice. Spectacle. So I said nothing. And later, said Vale, you suspected Kamal had the register. She looked at him in surprise. Yes? Yet you did not accuse him. No? Why? She looked toward Kamal with grief so quiet it emptied the whole courtyard. Because by then I loved him less foolishly than before. I knew if he had it, he would have taken it first for her. There is no answer to such sentences. They stand. The police officer present, who until then had worn the dull impatience of official attendance at private intelligence, now stepped forward and declared Clara under arrest. It was inevitable, yet the legal act felt almost secondary, as if the real sentence had already passed between the living. Faridi said suddenly, no. The officer stared. No, he repeated. She shall not be carried off like a market thief while I sit and let my own silence stand upright beside her, Farid said. If she killed him, she did what I had gone there to prevent only because I feared I might do the same if he spoke long enough. The officer spread his hands. Madam, whatever your feelings, my feelings, she said, are of no interest. My history is. And there, in the middle of Zincirlikuh, under the broken cage and the eyes of merchants who had all traded once or twice in the reputations of others, Faridi told the old story plainly, not ornamented, not softened, a working girl, a dead brother, a living brother who arranged papers, a merciful marriage, a son raised honestly under a name given in kindness, a late blackmail by a man who had prospered on the original injury and wished to prosper once more upon its memory. When she finished, there was no murmur. The bazaar had overheard many things. It had seldom been given the naked truth. The officer, to his credit, removed his cap. Clara let herself then be led away. She did not resist. As she passed Kamal, he spoke as if to speak. She did not stop him with pride, nor encourage him with tenderness. She merely said, do not borrow duty again from what ought to be love. It was the harshest kindness I have ever heard. After they were gone, Kamal remained where he stood, as though some inward architecture had failed, and left him upright by habit only. Faraday laid a hand on his arm. He turned into it like a man half his age. Mr. Vale, who hated scenes and endured them badly, looked up at the empty chain from which the cage had fallen. The note is not fully recovered, he said. Almost laughed from exhaustion. Must there be more? There is always more. That is why murder is untidy. He was right. The remaining fragment had yet to be found, and without it the full extent of Selim Ertan's knowledge and intention might still be argued into lesser shape. That night, Kamal delivered it himself. He came to my room after dark, soaked from a sudden rain, and placed upon the table a narrow strip of brown paper wrapped in wax cloth. He had hidden it, he confessed, not in the cage, but later beneath the binding board of a devotional book in Clara's house, intending to retrieve and burn it. The fall of the cage had frightened him into surrendering the rest. Vale unfolded it. There, in the same cramped old hand, were the final words that completed the record. Not merely that the first entry had been forced, but that Selim Ertan, younger brother to the deceased offender, had urged concealment so that the family name suffered no public stain, promising that the girl and child would be quietly provided for. He wrote himself into the margin, I said. No, said Vale. He was written there by another man who distrusted him. That single line completed the moral geometry of the affair. Selim had not stumbled upon an inherited shame. He had participated in its burial and now sought profit from the grave. Kemal stood like a penitent awaiting pronouncement. I did not kill him, he said, but I made the room in which he died. Vale folded the strip carefully. Yes, he said, that is near enough to the truth to hurt you for a long time. Chapter 9. The Weight of Mercy. One might imagine that after confession the matter passes neatly into law and from law into closure. It does not. Courts concern themselves with acts. Human beings must continue living beside causes. The next days were occupied with statements, signatures, interviews, and the slow conversion of private misery into public record. Clara was held, though with more consideration than many women in her position would have received, perhaps because several persons of standing came forward to speak for her character, and perhaps because even the magistrate could see that the dead man's conduct had made the case morally uglier than the statute liked. Kamal, though not charged with the killing, was compelled to account for the concealment of the register and the workshop break-in. The latter he admitted. As for the former, the authorities were uncertain whether to call it obstruction, panic, or filial madness. It was all three. I visited Clara twice in custody in my capacity as physician. She bore confinement with a strange calm, as if after years of inward distortion, plain walls were almost a relief. She asked after Feride before asking after herself. She asked after Kemal only once. "Has he told the whole truth?" she said. "As much as he presently can." She gave a sad little nod. "That will have to do. He always wanted to be better than the world and more effective than goodness allows. Such men break against compromise and then pretend they chose the stone." On my second visit, she said, "Do not let Feride blame herself for me. That may be beyond my power. Then tell her this from me. I did not kill Selim for Kemal. I killed him because there are moments when another person's contempt becomes a physical thing in the room, and if one more word is spoken, either you vanish or he does. I chose badly, but not blindly. I carried that message, though not at once. Mr. Vale preferred that emotions be delivered only when they could do more help than harm, and in this he was often wiser than I. Feride received us in her workshop, now repaired from the burglary. She had resumed work, though more slowly. There is no heroism in labour after a catastrophe. There is merely necessity. Still, the sight of her bent over cloth again had in it a kind of stern grace. When I gave Clara's message, Feride closed her eyes briefly. "She should never have had to choose in a room with him," she said. "No," said Vale, "but she did." Feride set down her needle. "What will become of her?" "A court may see provocation," I said. "The facts do her some mercy, though not enough." Feride nodded. "Mercy always arrives insufficiently clothed. Kemal came in while we were there. He looked altered, not only thinner, but stripped of the earnest dignity by which he had once arranged himself before the world. That loss made him at once less admirable and more human. "I have resigned from my post," he said. Feride looked up sharply. "Without speaking to me? What use is a post taken under this shadow?" "The use," she answered, "of feeding yourself honestly and not wasting the years I spent giving you the chance." He bowed his head. "I do not deserve it." "Deserving again," murmured Vale. "A tedious doctrine." Kemal turned to him almost angrily. "You may despise the word. I must live inside it." Vale's expression softened by a degree. "No, you must live beyond it, which is harder." He then did something unexpected. He told Kemal plainly what the old registrar had said, namely that the lawful later entry under Hassan Arslan's name was valid in public record and not erased by the hidden note. The shame remained historical and personal. It need not become destiny unless Kemal himself submitted to that form. The young man listened as if hearing language from a great distance. "Then all this," said Vale, "was built upon a dead man's understanding of how terror distorts judgment. He counted correctly in almost every case." Kemal sat down heavily on the stool by the wall. "My mother suffered. Clara is imprisoned. Basilio nearly hanged himself. And you assisted the machinery," said Vale. "Name it correctly if you ever wish to step away from it." It was harsh. It was also, I think, the first useful thing anyone could have said to him. The remaining false lead collapsed that same day. A jeweller's apprentice came forward to say he had seen Basilio on the morning of the murder, not lurking near the Han, as rumour claimed, but genuinely arguing over an invoice in the lane 2 streets away. Thus the clerk's inconvenient absence, while suspicious in outline, was fixed more solidly by external witnesses. He was guilty of concealments of trade, not of homicide. When informed he would likely be released on the murder suspicion, Basilio snorted. "I shall treasure the distinction." He later came to Farida's workshop, awkward as a boy, and placed on her table the silver-backed brush seized from his rooms and now returned. It had belonged to Selim, though why Basilio had kept it I never learned. "You once told me," he said to her, "that the worst men leave their shape in useful objects. I thought if I kept one thing of his, I might someday feel less cheated by him." It did not work. Faride pushed the brush back, then let it go properly. He looked at her for a long moment, then wrapped it again, and left, without another word. That evening Mr. Vale and I took tea in the courtyard of Zincirli Han for what felt like the first time without the pressure of active pursuit. The parrot's cage had been rehung, though now only one bird remained. It moved about nervously, tilting its head at every passing sound as if the fall had altered its trust in gravity. "You are dissatisfied," I said. "I am never satisfied, but I am finished. You regret Clara's arrest. I regret the entire breed of circumstances that made it possible. Regret is not analysis." He stirred his tea, though he took no sugar. "There is something else," he said after a while. "The final emotional error of the case belongs not to Clara, nor Kemal, nor even Faridi. It belongs to the world around them, which was perfectly willing for years to let Selim Ertan move as a respectable man because his ugliness was profitable and distributed discreetly. That is not something one can arrest. No, that is why it persists." The surviving parrot let out a sharp metallic cry. The sound echoed briefly against the stone galleries and was gone. "Will Clara hang?" I asked. "No, not on these facts, but neither will she leave untouched. And Kemal, he will either become humbler than ambition likes or more dangerous than disappointment admits. And Farid?" Vale looked across the courtyard where she was closing her shutters. "She will work tomorrow. Some people survive by the next motion of the hand. That is all." He rose then, and before we left went to the spot beneath the cage where the first fragment had fallen. He stood there a moment, eyes on the upper chain. "What are you seeing?" I asked. The "The first image," he said. "The cage?" "No. The woman who fed the bird because the boys forgot." He said nothing more, yet I understood him. Crimes begin with injuries. They are solved sometimes by following care. Chapter 10. The room where he smiled. The magistrate requested, before formal charges were finalised, a private reconstruction of the killing for his own clarity. Official minds, like pictures, once words grow morally inconvenient. Mr. Vale agreed on condition that only essential persons be present. Thus, 5 days after the discoveries in the courtyard, we gathered once more in Selim Ertan's counting room at Zincirli Han. Present were the magistrate, the police officer, Clara under guard, Feridi and Kemal by permission, Basilio as witness, Nihat the landlord, and myself. The room had been left almost untouched since the day of death, save for necessary removals. The desk remained where it had stood. The soot-marked lamp, though cleaned, sat in the same position. Outside the repaired lattice, the courtyard murmured faintly under ordinary trade. I thought, not for the first time, how indecently normal commerce can sound beside explanation. Mr. Vale began without rhetoric. Selim Ertan expected intrusion by the window, because he had laid a trap around the missing register. He had shown at least one sketch of the lattice position, and boasted of the register's arrival. Farid Hanum, fearing for her son, entered early by that route and searched. She failed to find the object, left brick dust at the sill and threshold, and withdrew unseen. Ertan arrived later, discovered signs of search, and recognised opportunity. He sent Basilio away to secure privacy. He then awaited whichever anxious soul might next come to him. Vale indicated the window, the desk, the chair. Clara Ertan came by the door. He admitted her because he enjoyed superior ground in moral contests. He had with him, I believe, either the register itself or the removed hidden note. He displayed enough to establish power, not enough to surrender it. There was a speech, likely mockery, likely physical presumption. Clara did not lower her eyes. She looked at the desk as if it were a mouth she had once seen open. On the desk, Vale continued, lay a parcel tied with a narrow blue silk cord. Such cords are common in the bazaar. One had recently bound a repaired wrapper or textile sample. In the struggle or decisive instant, Clara took it, passed it forward around his neck while he stood or rose partly from the chair, and pulled upward with both hands. The chair kicked back. Because he was taken by surprise and because the cord was a bit high, he could not cry out effectively. Here Clara made the smallest movement of assent. She then searched the desk and lamp area, said Vale. The soot on one side of the chimney shows it was lifted and replaced badly in haste. Her cuff or veil still carried saffron stain from the previous day. That trace transferred to Selim Ertan's cuff when he caught her, or when she leaned across the desk. The broken silk fibres at his collar came from the cord. The magistrate asked, why was the register not found then? Because Selim, having discovered the earlier window intrusion, had moved it, not to a drawer, not to the desk. He was vain, not foolish. He concealed it in the false bottom of a document case beneath the study escritoire at his house, the same place where the key later led us. Clara searched only the office. She fled empty-handed. Kemal closed his eyes. Later, said Vale, while assisting in the house after the death, Kemal Arslan found that document case, recovered the register, removed the hidden note, and concealed it in fragments. He did so not as the killer, but as one who feared the dead man's weapon even after the dead man was gone. The magistrate turned to Kemal. You admit this? I do. Vale inclined his head. He also burglarized his mother's workshop later, searching for any remaining fragment or copy. That act further clouded suspicion around her. Farida said quietly, he has admitted it to me. The police officer asked, and Basilio, framed by convenience, said Vale. The planted papers in his case were false property extracts already in circulation among Selim's dubious dealings. Their placement benefited whoever wished time and confusion. I do not assert whether Clara or Kemal placed them. The timing suggests Kemal, who had freer access later and clearer motive to divert attention from both women. Kemal whispered, yes. Clara looked at him with a kind of sorrow stripped of surprise. She had known then, or partly known. The magistrate rubbed his brow. So the homicide is Clara's, the concealment is Kemal's, the originating blackmail is the dead man's. The mother's role is attempted recovery only. Precisely, said Vale. Then why, asked the magistrate, did it take such an infernal long to sort? Vale's answer was characteristic. Because people do not act in moral files, Your Excellency. They overlap. That might have been the end. Yet Faride asked then, in a voice steady enough to silence the whole room, Mr. Vale, tell it also in the other order. He looked at her. The human order, she said. So he did. He spoke not now of dust, keys, and soot, but of years. A poor girl forced and then tidied out of scandal. A merciful husband whose goodness had no witness save the son he raised. A younger brother who hid the shame to protect a family name and later traded on the hidden knowledge because vice had aged into appetite. A son who built himself on duty and, when threatened, reached for manipulation rather than trust. A wife who mistook confrontation for agency until contempt in the room became unbearable and fatal violence followed. A mother who tried to protect and by protecting multiplied secrecy. bureaucracy, a clerk who knew enough to be dangerous and too little to be believed. When he finished, no one at first moved. It was the magistrate, oddly enough, who broke the silence. "Very well," he said. "The law can only take the first order. God or memory may take the second." Clara was led away once more. This time she turned before the door and looked not at Kamal but at Faride. "I am sorry," she said. Faride answered, "So am I." That was all. After the others had gone, I remained with Vale for a few minutes in the counting room. Evening light had begun to reach across the desk. The place looked smaller than on the day of death. Murder rooms often do, once stripped of suspense. "You were hard on Kamal," I said. "He needed hardness. Sympathy he already had in excess. And Clara? She needed truth spoken without admiration. And Faride?" He looked at the empty place on the shelf where some object had once stood. "She needed at least one person to understand that concealment and innocence are not opposites." We left the room and locked it behind us. In the gallery outside, the parrot's cage hung quietly in the lengthening light. The surviving bird had tucked its head under one wing. Below us, the courtyard resumed its evening business. Tea, thread, bargaining, prayer, copper striking copper in the lower arcade. The world had not improved. It had only been compelled to pronounce one of its hidden sentences aloud. Chapter 11. The thread left. Uncut winter came early that year, or seemed to. In cities by water, the first cold is often not sharp but insinuating. It enters cuffs, stairwells, the joints of old houses, and the pauses in conversation where names are not spoken. By the time the case of Celia Merton reached its formal conclusion, a grey dampness had settled over the city and turned every morning chimney into a blurred brushstroke. Clara did not hang. The court, having heard the full account of provocation, blackmail, and the dead man's long part in an older cruelty, returned a lesser verdict than murder planned in cold blood. She was sentenced, though not to the ultimate penalty. That was justice of a kind, if not the kind novels prefer. She would lose years. She would keep her life. Neither fact cancelled the other. Kamal withdrew from public ambition for a time, which was perhaps wise. He found temporary work copying accounts for a shipping office, where no one cared who his grandfather had been so long as columns were straight. I saw him once in those weeks on the Galata Bridge. He looked tired and older, but not broken. There was in his face the first honest uncertainty I'd ever seen there. It improved him. Basilio left Zintyurli Han and entered partnership with a cousin in Smyrna, dealing, one hoped, in papers less explosive than births and estates. Before departing, he called on me to complain at length about every injustice done to him, and then, with no transition at all, asked whether I thought Farida Hanum required any discreet financial assistance. "You are becoming sentimental," I said. "I am becoming practical," he retorted. "She is owed by the world and unlikely to invoice it." I told him where and how such help might be given without offence. He pretended not to care for my opinion and followed it exactly. As for Faride, she remained in her workshop under the arcade of Zintyurli Han. People brought her more work, not less. This surprised me until I understood that tragedy had not diminished her standing. It had clarified it. There are communities, even flawed ones, that recognise endurance when they see it and pay for the privilege of being near it. One wet afternoon in late November, I accompanied Mr. Vale there for what became our last visit before he left the city. Faride was rebraiding the border of an old military standard whose colours had gone almost to ash. The lamp beside her burned low and clean. Outside, the courtyard stones held recent rain in dark, shallow mirrors. "You're going," she said to Vale before either of us had spoken. "Yes." "Do you always leave before the people you have unsettled decide whether to thank you?" "Gratitude is a form of weather," he said. "I've never found it reliable." That drew from her the nearest thing to a smile I'd seen since the first day. Kamal entered while we were there, carrying a parcel of tea and coal. He greeted us without embarrassment, which was itself a kind of progress. He had begun, I thought, to understand that shame kept too polished becomes vanity by another name. "I have something for you," Farid said to Vale. From a drawer she took a narrow strip of linen finely woven, about the length of his habitual tape. Along one edge she had worked in blue silk a tiny repeating pattern of linked windows, so discreet it might be missed at a glance. "For measuring," she said. "Yours is frayed." Vale accepted it with a seriousness that would have amused anyone who mistook him for cold. "I am not often improved by evidence," he said. "This is an exception." She looked at me. "And for the doctor," she said. "Nothing. He notices too much already." That made us all laugh, and the laughter, because it came after so much heaviness, was almost painful. When we rose to leave, Kamal walked with us as far as the courtyard arch. The parrot's cage hung above, newly polished. The remaining bird shifted and rattled its brass ring with one claw. "I used to think," he said abruptly, "that if one concealed enough ugliness, good people could live uninjured above it. Now I think the ugliness only chooses its own hour." Vale considered him. "Concealment is sometimes mercy," he said. "More often it is interest accumulating." Kamal nodded as if accepting a debt. "And love?" he asked after a moment. moment, Vale's face altered by that smallest degree which with him meant pity. Love is what remains possible after the account is closed. You are not there yet. We parted. Under the arch, the smell of wet wool and roasting chestnuts mingled in the evening air. A porter went by, bent beneath a bale of cloth. Somewhere nearby, a child practiced a flute badly and with full conviction. The city, indifferent and intimate, continued. Mr. Vale left Constantinople 2 days later on a steamer bound first for Marseille. He sent me from the deck before departure, no speech at all, only a folded note containing one sentence. Feed the bird if the boys forget. I kept the note. Years have passed since then, and I have often thought that the case at Zinkirli-Han taught me less about detection than about the poor architecture by which decent people try to live around old harm. We imagine the past as something behind us. It is more often sewn into the edge of the cloth, where the hand that repairs may find it by accident, and the hand that profits by it may pretend not to know it is there. I saw Clara once more after her release, long afterward and by chance, in a chapel yard in Trieste. She was older and dressed plainly. We spoke little. She asked after Ferriday. She asked after Kamal. She did not ask after Mr. Vale, which told me perhaps more than a direct question would have done. When we parted, she touched my sleeve and said, "Tell him, if ever you see him, that he was right about usefulness. I mistook being needed for being loved. I never delivered the message. Mr. Vale and I met again in later years, but some communications belong to the silence that produced them. Of Farid I heard occasionally through merchants. She kept her workshop. Her eyes weakened, then steadied. Kemal married late and sensibly to a schoolmaster's daughter who, I was told, possessed both kindness and a temper sufficient for truth. Basilio prospered and denied it loudly. Such things are, in their way, satisfying. Yet when I think of that whole affair now, I don't first remember the dead man at his desk or Clara's hand upon the cord. I remember the brass cage turning in the damp air above the courtyard, the red cloth lifting slightly at one corner, and beneath it a living creature trusting its perch because someone, somewhere in that stone hive of trade and secrecy, remembered to scatter seed. That perhaps is the saddest and most hopeful fact I can offer. Not that evil was uncovered, but that care, though smaller, outlasted it.